Senators, in 2017, I had a child hospitalized for 3 weeks in Spokane, Washington. We were released literally Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, and the child had, my son David, had an NG tube inserted for feeding. He had made an excellent recovery, but he still had some progress to go. And when we were checking out of really what was a seniors facility, one of the nurses who didn't understand what our treatment plan was, when David pulled his NG tube out, she ended up, because we have a mandatory reporting requirement in Idaho for potential child neglect cases, she ended up reporting our situation to Idaho's CPS, Child Protective Services. And this is Wednesday after we'd gone through a lot of stress. David nearly died the first couple days after his stroke. And we arrived home that night, Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving, and I got a call from a Bonner County deputy sheriff that said that they wanted to come out and visit my home, and that there was a CPS worker that wanted to come and see my son David because of a concern about child neglect. Well, as it turned out, we actually had a plan in place with the nutritionist, and so this caught us quite by surprise. And I negotiated with him to let her come the next day. Well, this happens 24,000 times a year in Idaho. There are calls to the care line, to the Department of Health and Welfare, because there are allegations or concerns about child protection, mainly for neglect. Could be medical, could be educational. There are also concerns about child abuse. About 8,400 cases actually had a visit from the Department of Health and Welfare. And oftentimes parents are caught off guard, they're unaware, and the Department of Health and Welfare has a system in place whereby they're trying to level the playing field with parents so they don't feel overwhelmed when they have these interactions with CPS. So in their own brochure and details, they talk about equipping parents for these interactions with the Department of Health and Welfare. But again, oftentimes law enforcement is there, and these aren't criminal investigations. The department is there to ascertain the safety of the children. Well, several years ago, while I was still a citizen, I brought the idea that we should let parents know what their rights are in a CPS investigation very early on. Years ago, when I brought my concern to them that we ought to better equip parents as to what to expect in this process and tell parents what their rights are in this process, our former director of the Department of Health and Welfare agreed with me, which was nice, and he implemented this pamphlet, which I've had passed out to you. It's a pretty friendly pamphlet, and it tells parents what their rights are in a CPS investigation, and that is what our bill today is. It basically would put this into statute. It would amend Idaho Code, add a new section about this rights notification. What it says is that when a department worker, so this isn't law enforcement, but when a department worker shows up and talks to a parent directly and in person, at that time or within 72 hours, they would give parents a notification of what their rights are as they interact with the department. And we've allowed in this legislation the department to prescribe the form, and it turns out the form you have with you is the one that the former director implemented years ago, and it actually includes all of the requirements of our legislation. The reason we want to do the legislation is we want to ensure that this continues. The former director thought this was a great idea and something that we have a duty as the state of Idaho to allow parents to understand what these well-established constitutional rights are. These aren't statutory rights, we're not adding rights, and it is that they can not answer questions, and that's right here in the pamphlet on the back of the page. It says that you can refuse to talk to Child and Family Services. You can obtain an attorney, but it would be at your own expense. This isn't a criminal investigation. We say right inside the trifold pamphlet, do I have to talk to the social worker? No, you can refuse entry into your home and access to your children. And we even include some of the language from the pamphlet in the statute. If you refuse entry, or if the safety cannot be determined and the department believes it's an emergency, then they can always get law enforcement. That's the key to understand. They can go to the court and get a warrant. Law enforcement, if there are exigent circumstances and they believe that the safety must be ascertained right away, with probable cause, they could still enter your home. So doing this rights notification does not prevent keeping Idaho's children safe in situations where their safety needs to be ascertained or even secured. But what it does is it levels the playing field as to making parents not feel overwhelmed in the process.
Vote count shows 35 senators in favor with none against, a majority having voted in the affirmative. Senate Bill 1232 as amended is passed the Senate. Hearing no correction to title, the title is approved and the bill will be transmitted to the House.